Hello, beautiful souls. How are you today? I have been led to, gosh, this is a tough one. There's a lot of things I'm going to touch on, some specifics that I will get into, but I want to give you the gist because if I put everything that brought me to this information in this video, it would be way too long. So I'm going to link some things in the description box to kind of guide you, but ultimately the decision to do this research and to go look for the truth is yours. And so take this as definitely divinely led, but if it doesn't resonate with you, if it's something that you just doesn't sit well with you, let it go and move on. There's lots of things, gosh, honestly, almost everything that we've ever been told is the exact opposite of what happened, or the reasons why things happened are not at all what we've been told. So I used to say that I overuse the term mind blown. But there's really not another way in this subpar English language that I know that we deal with to describe what my 3D matrix brain does with this information as it comes in, and my soul tells me that it's true, and then I confirm with source creator, and then I get downloads of the truth because I've opened that door. And I know you need to know, because honestly, if we were just respected as human beings and given the truth and then allowed us to make decisions along the way, our lives would be completely different. They never allowed us to know the truth. The truth was funneled away from us and disguised and flipped. And so I'm going to touch on a few things that you can take it upon yourself to go do the research of: the mud floods, the orphan trains, and the incubator babies. Now, I don't want you to get hung up on dates and years, time frames, because that also has been manipulated. So you're going to look at the events and use your discernment. So you need to tap into your heart and your soul and try to bypass the brain, because the brain is what's been fed this manipulated narrative for our entire existence. And so you're going to have cognitive dissonance because you're engaging the brain on something that's really a soul level truth of our humanity, of our history. So the mud floods, when they occurred, the reason behind the mud floods was to destroy the last true golden age that we experienced around the world, which was called tartaria. There's many people that do excellent work on all different platforms about tartaria knowledge, and I invite you to go and look at it, because it's one of those things, like, once you see it, you cannot unsee it. But it is a wealth of information that really opens the doors to so many different avenues of truth. So much information. I apologize. I can't just free fly with this. I will be channeling some of this information though, because some of my guides from across the veil are assisting in this information because they lived in this time and they have firsthand account. So mud floods decimated the bulk of the adult childbearing population around the world. So the controllers worked with malevolent off-worlders to repopulate the planet. At the same time, simultaneously, the Galactic Federation was assisting in repopulating the planet to light beings, to with good intention souls, as much as they could. It was in these moments, because of organ harvesting and DNA harvesting that had already been taking place through the off-world agendas, there was a abundance of human DNA. And so the various different races that were playing a part in repopulating Earth had access to male and female genes and male and female reproductive parts. And so many test tube and pod babies were created. These were for the benevolent sources given to deserving childless older couples and single moms and things like that, as like miracle babies, right? And then on the malevolent side, you had orders being filled. So children with specific traits, hair color, eye color, skin color, various different things, were basically ordered up and delivered. And so it also, that was one aspect, but it also immediately produced this large percent of orphans. So a lot of the children of the adults that were succumbed to the mud floods, all of a sudden were homeless and responsible for themselves, and turned over to orphanages and were living on the streets. And it was rampant all in all of the eastern cities. So hidden in behind some altruistic idea, there was an organization that decided through social welfare projects that, in light of the horrendous conditions that the orphanages and the welfare system provided, the huge numbers of orphans that required assistance, they could not fulfill the need. And so it was the brainchild of this man. I have to find my, I'm going off script, so I have to find my one second. I'll be right back. Found it as soon as I hit the pause button. Charles Loring Brace, BRACE, devised a system to take poor homeless children from the East Coast and ship them out west. Now, I will say that when I first heard that, years ago, I heard about the orphan trains, and I was looking it up and saw the images of all the children hanging off these trains and walking on the train tracks and whatnot. I remember thinking, what the hell? Who's with all these children? So there was one agent sent with an entire train load of orphans, and they would run ads in all the different cities in the Midwest where they were going to be making these stops. And they would line the children up, and the ages of the children were like 2 to 12. But really young, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 was the average age. So they would line them up on the platform, the ones that had not been claimed yet. Even the verbiage in the whole thing just makes my skin crawl. And the people in the town would come to look at these children and decide whether they wanted to give them a place in their home. And the way the ads were written, they would say stuff like, don't you have an empty chair in the corner of your home where you can provide a cup of soup to a homeless, poor, indigent child? Doesn't really sound loving, does it? But they had nothing. So they really did truly believe in a sense, they were providing a second chance for these kids. So anyway, most of the people in the Midwest are farmers, right? When you go to like an auction for your horse, they look at their teeth and they pick up their feet and they look at their hooves and they check their constitution and they run their finger down their back to see if there's any tenderness. So these children were having their teeth checked on the side of the trains. They were being asked to run in place, do push-ups to see if they were sound. Yeah, I don't know. It was like a livestock auction. It's the way it is described. It's like a livestock auction. Anyway, so as I'm getting this information, I'm cross-referencing back to some of the other stuff, but as I'm reading the narratives, the truth is downloading into my brain. Okay. So as soon as I got to the part about the massive numbers of orphans that needed homes, I started getting that why they were orphaned. The mud floods took their family, took their parents. Then it hit me that because of the benevolent space races and then the malevolent space races, the malevolents took advantage of this opportunity to create organic portals and NPCs and put them on our planet. This is how they came about. I often wondered, like, have they been with us since the beginning of time? Because there's been hybrid genetic manipulation in humanity since we were created. And it hit me and has been confirmed that yes, this is how organic portals and NPCs came to be in our existence. So the malevolent ones were putting bodies there that could be controlled, that had an agenda, and that was never going to be able to connect to source because they were made away from source light. They were not in alignment to source creator and therefore would never be. And so then you had the benevolent races that were creating in a pod from human DNA children who then would get walk-in souls that were of the light. And so again, duality in all things, good and bad in all things, light and dark in all things. So their efforts to repopulate the world were successful, and it really supported their agendas, both the light agenda and the dark agenda. And so genetically, these babies literally could say that they are all siblings. Many, 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 many babies were created out of DNA harvested from the same man and woman, and then sent out in the world to different places and manipulated, given whatever things was on their order. But in its inception, they were from the same harvested DNA that the Zetas were taking from the beginning of time. So the stork delivering babies is a lighthearted way to say, you ordered a child, here it is, it's been delivered to you. It was a spin to say, yeah, we know Martha never had a pregnancy, but oh, look at this little newborn you have. Stork brought your baby. Actually, babies were transported. This is another. So back in the day, back in this time frame, this image I'm showing you is of Coney Island in the early 1900s. Back in the day, they had airships, blimps, right? Inside of a blimp was like hollowed out vastness where you could build a frame of seating or rooms or whatever. And they could literally deliver 100 to 200 children into a city at a time. And they did. And so the stork is that lighthearted disclosure that, oh, it's just a fable, or it's just this, or it's just that. It doesn't make any sense. It really does make sense. It's them telling us what they're doing because they have to disclose in a way that's almost unbelievable. Yeah. So the blimps were used to carry all these children to all these different cities because this was not just like an American thing. This was an around the world thing. Tartaria was not in one place. It was a period of time. It was a golden age. And so this was a worldwide event. So the time frame, 1854 to 1929, is when the orphan trains were run. In the beginning, they were used, a lot of the children were used for the labor shortage. That was again caused from the mud floods. Now they wrap that into different illnesses and war and stuff like that, but that's not really what took these people off this earth plane. So they were using children in the factories. You can look it up. There's tons of images of little ones operating heavy, very dangerous machinery in these plants. They were a main participants in the Industrial Revolution. So those that weren't working in plants or working in farming, or they were doing domestic work, there were a few. It's not 100%. There were a few that were adopted into loving families that truly had the best intentions. And so they were given good lives. But by and large, I mean, there's even documented evidence of several of the orphans that asked to be taken back to the orphanage. So what does that tell you? There's also several documented accounts, like their own stories, that they say, I was on the orphan train and I ended up in Nebraska, but I only have memory of a man taking me to the train and a man picking me up off the train. I don't have any other memories of my childhood. Now, I know I've been doing this long enough to know that when you don't have memories of your childhood, it's because your soul has been fractured or you've been mind wiped or a combination of both. And so the trauma and the abuse causes the soul to fracture, and those memories are locked away. And it results in big gaps of no memory. Also, being alien abducted, you get mind wiped. And alien abductions happen over a course of time, sequential time, repeatedly, which culminates in massive years lost in memories of children. I don't have a lot of memories of my childhood for that same reason. Most people that don't have memories of their childhoods because they were frequently abducted and mind wiped. And so they have little blips here and there, but not a lot. Not a lot. So again, the Social Welfare Project, they assisted and was complicit with the healthcare, the mental health professionals as well. And so the narrative, one of the narratives as to why there was all these orphans, is because women were having extramarital affairs, or their spouse was killed, and they had all these children, and they would go crazy. That's what the narrative. They had all these kids, and they couldn't keep up with it, and they couldn't provide for them because there was no one bringing in money, and so and they lost their minds. And so to save the woman and the children, we take the woman and take them to an insane asylum. And then we take the children and put them in orphanages and adopt them out. Well, let's think about that. It is not uncommon for people to have more than 2 children and lose a spouse and continue to raise their children. It's not. Even then, communities came together. People did lend a hand, a helping hand. But because of the stigma that was put on these women inadvertently, it was a lie that was sold to the public, and they were too willing to believe it. And so these women would basically have all their children kidnapped by the government. And then they would be put in a healthcare mental institution where they would be given the pharmaceuticals that numbed them to the truth and made them zombies. And those who kept fighting for the truth and kept asking about their children, well, they were part of the very, very large number of people that were getting lobotomies. They just plucked those memories right out of that brain. So they really were zombies then after. So horrific. Now, when I read that was not, that was me like connecting dots, but all that information I just gave you, I found in literature. When I read that, I was like, oh, so this was the earliest form of CPS, DCFS, overreach, taking children and selling them or adopting them out or using them in ways they shouldn't have. It began in the early 1900s. All of these different organizations, for lack of a better word, were complicit and culpable. Healthcare, education, welfare, the Catholic orphanages, all the orphanages, but most of them at the time were Catholic run. So religion, they all were complicit and worked together to sell and ship these children who had had their families ripped apart, send them out west to God knows what, and never think about them again. Now, the ones that were placed like a pre-order, like a adoption application had been put in with the orphanage, and then that adoption had been completed with a certain child, and then that child was brought out to wherever, those would get follow-up visits every year by the priest and a couple of nuns, the sisters. But the rest of them, they didn't. And the way that the priest would put these children, 3, 4, 5 years old on their lap and say, how are the other kids doing? Did they go to good homes? Do you know where they are? That's how they would check in. And then they would leave town. They'd be there for a couple of days and be gone. And they did this every July. July is when they took the train from east to west and went checked on their children that they had placed. So you've got women being turned into zombies, their children taken from them, they're put in a system. Some people don't have moms that to be taken from, they're just homeless and parentless and living on the street, and they were picked up and put on these trains and sold the story of a better life, and then they got whatever they got. There really wasn't a whole lot of concern about this. People just turned a blind eye. They just let it be for years. It wasn't until 1929 when people started to say, this is not okay. And it came about because of all the children dying in factories, dying in fields, no record of their death because there was no record of their birth. But there were bodies that they had to get cleaned up off the industrial revolutionary floor. So it became a problem. And there was some people that said, maybe this isn't such a good idea. Maybe we shouldn't have 6-year-olds running this equipment. You think? So, in the earliest years of the turn of the century, of the 19th century, it's when child trafficking was in front of their faces, in plain sight, on the orphan train. They just had a different name to it. So I invite you to go look it up. Everything that I've said, with the exception of a few dots that I connected divinely, is out there. So there were such numbers. Over 250,000 children were transported in this period of time. Think about that. 250,000 lives. Just put on a train, one-way ticket. Best of luck to you. Amazing. Also, once this Charles Loring Brace developed his system, it was called the Children's Aid Society. Look at it. There were more than 80 other entities that duplicated the system and also worked along the same policies and procedures. So that's how you ended up with all these different people that just could not send children west and throughout the world enough, because it was a moneymaker. So those were the ones that were living on the street. Those are the ones that were toddlers and very, very young children. Like I said, up to around the age of 12. Most of them, by the time they turned 12, were considered adults. And they got jobs and they moved out on their own and they did whatever they could do to take care of themselves. By then, they had been doing that for a very, very long time. They had the skills and they just broke free of whatever, if they were able to, of whatever situation they had found themselves in. And so that's why you have a lot of people from that time frame that don't have memories of their childhood, and they don't have memories. They didn't have parents to speak of, and the ones that they did were, by and large, not good. So there was another thing, though. Remember the pod babies and the test tube babies? Like, so where did the little babies go? Baby incubators. So there was a guy who was not a medical doctor, and he was an inventor, and he was Eastern Europe, Germany, somewhere that area. So he helped to develop, his name is Martin Couney, Couney. He created the first incubators for preemies. Now, when I first heard about incubator babies, I thought that has to be false, because I was a registered nurse and worked in healthcare in hospitals for more than 20 some odd years, and was in the military before that. And I just couldn't fathom that the images I was seeing of babies with no parents were on display at World's Fairs and Coney Island, and people paid $0.25 to see the incubator babies. And nobody asked where their moms were? What's happening here? But it's true. And so the story is that the many, many hospitals would take these preemies and basically let them die. They called them weaklings. And so it was to this guy, Martin Couney. He was giving them a second chance of life. Well, what he did was he created all these incubators. He hired nurses and he hired wet nurses. And he developed a way that he could take these babies from wherever he got them and put them in incubators and put them on display. And it would further his public personification of being a medical doctor, really like a savior to these babies. But also, he used it as a way, he said, to give the babies a second chance. So he would adopt these babies out or sell them or whatever. There's documented like newspaper articles and things that people had been interviewed, because there was many people that questioned whether the babies were actually alive. And you could go in, you can walk and see that they were alive, and that they were extremely small and extremely like they're monitored, but there's nobody like giving them nurturing. You know what I mean? They're just in a glass box. And so they had medical doctors coming to him for advice on taking care of preemies and how did the incubators work and that kind of thing. So he was really in his ego, right? And so there's a picture of him holding these preemies up like puppies. I wouldn't even hold a puppy that way, first of all. But he's holding them up like they're for sale. Which one do you want? So the narrative was the preemies at the hospitals, largely dismissed as weaklings, got a second chance at life. So 6,500 neonates between 1896 and 1943 were put in his care. And he sold them. So some of his protocols: when a child is admitted, it receives a bath. If it's able to swallow, a small dose of brandy is given. They are swaddled in either pink or blue blankets and then fed every 2 hours by a wet nurse, a bottle, or spooned through the nose. I wanted to vomit when I read that. So you're basically drowning them in whatever you're putting down their nose because they're inhaling that. Nose is connected to your airway. Just okay. So anyway, some woman that he married that was allegedly a nurse said that was one of her special skills. In regards to the preemie care at the time, Boston Medical and Surgical Journal in 1901 was asked, is it even worthwhile to try to save the runts that will pollute the gene pool? This physician that was interviewed at the time made a film in defense of that stance. And the tagline was, kill the defectives and save the nation. So this is the mentality of the culture at that time. So this was easy to see why children were looked at as extraneous and expendable. The horrific acts that were done for profit and power and prestige in Mr. Couney's position basically sold these children into indentured servitude, slavery, and it was all different forms of abuse. and all wrapped up in this bow of altruism, of being socially responsible to give these children a second chance. So, government, healthcare, welfare system, and religions worked with these communities. They were all on board and all culpable to this dark history. I know that there's so much that we don't know the truth about. This was just one of those things that was really a gut punch to me because, like most people that have a heart and a soul, we really don't want to think about the dark evil that attacks our children. But it's very real. And it's not just an individual, and it's not just a political party, and it is not just a certain area of the country or islands. It has been woven into the fabric of the institutions that we have to live among. And so the good people with good intentions have been outnumbered for a very, very long time until now. We, the light workers that volunteered to come down to this planet again to help with the ascension, have done a very good job at raising the awareness and the consciousness of the collective. If we sat back on our laurels, cried in our pillow about how dastardly this world was and did nothing, we would end up exactly where these people did. I won't have it. I cannot by myself change the world to be a better place. But we can come together and do that. And I firmly believe that we, the good, connected to source creator beings, vastly outnumber the evil. They have been leaving the planet in droves over the last couple of years. Not only that, there's been a huge number of people walking around us that are organic portals and NPCs. And so they really don't count because they don't have the option to go. They don't have the option to ascend. They can only be what they're programmed to be. So take them off the table. You automatically have 50% less to deal with. I know that some of the topics that Source Creator leads me to share the truth to you is very hard to stomach. I am sensitive to that. I have to wade through all of this and put it into a package that can be delivered to you in hopefully a way that you can digest it. So when you go in search of truth, there's a whole group of people that say, I want the truth. Just give me the truth. And then you start to give them the truth and go, oh no, that's not the truth. Because it's uncomfortable. Because it doesn't set well. Because they don't want to believe it. Well, none of those reasons make truth untrue. And that's exactly how we got here. So you have to really, really, really ground yourself in source light and know that the truth is difficult to hear, but it is still the truth. And once you reconcile what the truth is, then you can make sense of the chaos and you can transmute the pain. That is what we are being called to do. We are being called to turn everything dark to light and everything pain to bliss. If this hurts you, I'm sorry, but take that energy from the pain, from the anger, from the heartache, from the frustration, and transmute that into motivation to change, motivation to share. Love, forgiveness, gratitude, and play. Those are the 4 things that we need to be focused on in this now moment. This is what saves humanity because it's higher vibrational. If you are living amongst the mud and the muck, trying to wade through why crazy people without a soul do crazy things, Your vibrations are going to continue to be very, very low. And you're going to stay here in this dimension until the next time around, which will be in a few years. I'm asking you from the depths of my soul to get to know who you really are and what really matters to you, and focus on yourself. Because there's always going to be some craziness happening around you, but it's up to you to decide whether you want to partake in that. Share truth, no matter how hard it is. And be honest with yourself and Source Creator, because that is all you need. The truth of everything lives within inside of us. I knew that this stuff was hard to see, and I also knew that it resonated true. Much more so than the stories being told. Much more so. So, I invite you to do your own research. Again, I'll put some links in the description box, but see where it leads you. You're quite capable of finding things I didn't even find. Try your very best to stay in a high vibration. Love yourself and love those around you, even when they're not kind. Forgive all those who have hurt you, and forgive yourself for allowing that situation to occur. Give gratitude, heartfelt gratitude for the lessons being taught to us in this now moment. Even when they're hard to hear, they're valuable. And go outside in nature. Let the sun hit your face, and give gratitude for that too. Because that's where the joy is, that's where the bliss is, and that's where you can find out who you truly are. Break away from the noise, because it is just that. And go within, where the truth lives, and it has always been. Thank you for joining me today on Healing Disclosures, and I hope to see you again next time.